The views and opinions of the producer, hosts, and guests in the show do not directly reflect the official stand and policies of the management, the network, and the company.
Empower your mind. Be informed. Dahil lamang ang may alam. Knowing the latest trends and issues in the society. Feed your mind with information that are reliable, fresh, and straight from the experts. Be involved. Here in the conversations with Chester Quidlat, broadcasting live in big media. This is The Conversations.
Hello everyone! Good afternoon and to all our kababayans and of course from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. I am your anchor, Chester Quidlat, and welcome to The Conversations, your dose of interesting topics and discussions straight from the experts. Alright, so actually, this is our 8th episode, and I am very excited that we have this very special guest. And our topic as well will be, excuse me, will be more interesting to all our viewers right now, especially for the youths and the students who are currently taking pre-law or nasa mga freshman level, kasi ang ating talakayan for this afternoon is basically about the Philippine government. Okay? So alam ko na marami na tayong mga naging issues na napag-usapan at tinalakay dito sa The Conversations. But this afternoon, alamin naman natin ang pinanggalingan ng mga kapangyarihan ng mga taong nailuklok at talaga namang gumagawa ng issues sa kasalukuyan o ng mga balita. Pero syempre, bago din po ang lahat, gusto ko po munang gamitin ng oras na ito upang magpasalamat sa lahat ng mga tao na talagang tumatangkilik ng ating programa at nagbibigay ng magagandang feedback. And lalong-lalo na sa aking profesor na si Joey A. Lopez o si Sir Jal at si Sir Agnes na talaga namang simulat una pa lamang po ay sumusuporta at nanonood ng ating programa. Maraming salamat po. And yun na nga, sa lahat ng mga nakaantabay ngayon, alam ko nakakatapos nyo lang din mag-lunch and talaga namang inantabayanan nyo ang ating programa ngayong hapong ito. At ang ating talakayan ay patungkol nga sa ating Philippine government and its 3 branches. Okay? Ano-ano nga ba ang 3 departamento or branches na ito na talaga namang sa karamihan ay hindi pa alam kung ano ang mga meron sa mga departamentong ito at ano yung talagang gamit ng mga departamentong ito. Kaya mamaya, bago tayo magsimula at bago tayo mag-break, ipapakilala ko ang ating guest expert this afternoon na tatalakayin ang 3 branches na ito at aalamin natin ang mga bagay na talagang pumapaloob sa 3 malaking at makapangyarihang posisyon at opisina. Well, basically, above them, of course, is the Constitution, and we all know kasi that the Philippines is a republic, right? A republic with presidential form of government wherein power is equally divided among the 3 branches, namely the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And the government seeks to act, okay, in the interest of its citizens through the system of check and balance. So, maraming magtatanong yan, paano pag nag-overlap si executive kay judiciary or si judiciary nag-overlap kay legislative? Ano ang mangyayari at ano ba talaga ang parameter na mga mangyayari if this happens? Okay? Alam natin na pag sinabing presidente ng Pilipinas, ito ay makapangyarihan. Okay? Pag sinabi nating Senado or Congress, ito din ay may 2 tao pang mas mataas sa mga taong o lupo na naroon. Mamaya alamin natin ito. At sa judiciary, sino nga ba talaga ang namumuno at sino-sino ang parte ng bawat departamentong ito or ng branches na ito. Okay? So, kaya sa ating mga kabataan na nanonood ngayon, if you have your questions and your comment, you can freely write it down below sa comment section dito sa ating live. Kasi with our expert guest later, i-discuss natin ito. Okay? Aalamin natin ito, tatalakayin natin ito, not just basically what are this kind of branches and the meaning of it, how it works, but we will also deep dive about the reality or what happened in our context here in the Philippines. Ano ang nangyari sa executive branch? Ano ang nangyari sa legislative branch, sa judiciary branch? Kasi naging controversial eh. Right? There are different controversies in these different branches, kaya na-excite ako na talagang talakayin ito at talaga namang kapupulutan ng bawat isa sa atin ng aral. Okay, so with no further ado, okay, hindi na muna tayo magbi-break kasi gusto ko na talaga siyang ipakilala sa inyo. And I want to make it sure that our conversation or discussion this afternoon will be more talagang juicy in terms of the information that we need to get. Okay, now, our guest for this afternoon, okay, took up Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science and graduate from Far Eastern University, Manila. He is currently a Master's of Arts in Political Science student in De La Salle University, Manila, where he is also an instructor in social sciences for integrated school senior high school level. And a avid gamer, reader, and all-around geek that loves all things comics. He is a scholar in the field of political science who hopes to gain a better understanding of politics, introduce this field to others as an educator, and be a catalyst for continuous positive change in the Philippine society. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good friend of mine and a colleague, no, a former co-student from Far Eastern University, Mr. Xavier Dwight M. Gentalian.
Hi, Chester. Thank you
Hi,
very much for
Xavier.
that introduction.
Okay. So,
Hi,
before
yeah.
anything else, kamusta ang buhay ngayon or anong pinagkakaabalahan ng isang Xavier Dwight ngayon?
Ano nga ba? Life is good so far naman. Currently, I'm busy preparing to, as well as already reading for my thesis writing for my master's. And I am currently still teaching in DLS USHS, happily renewed for another academic year. On top of that, I'm waiting for a new episode of some of the anime that I'm watching and ayun, just reading up on all things that interest me.
Well, buti na pagsasabay mo. Kasi there are misleading information or the people how they see pol sci students that they are talaga more of reading books and
Yeah.
very unique that there are one person like you na you also watch movies, yung mga animes. Ano to? Ito ba yung nagiging escape mo pag stress ka na
Yeah,
sa mga
yeah.
readings?
Pretty much, yeah. Besides,
Okay.
benefit din yun ng pagiging single, wala kang ibang pinagkakaabala.
Siyempre. Pero parang last ano lang you are with someone. Pero syempre di natin tatalakayin. That's very private. But anyway, so you are currently teaching.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, well, this is a very common question na talagang tinatanong natin sa lahat ng mga guests natin. Kasi we all know naman, Xavier, what happened last year, no? We
Yeah.
are not prepared. And isa sa mga natamaan and currently, no, the administration, especially the Department of Education and SHED, no, hand in hands working kasi bumaba yung mga enrollees and syempre dahil sa pandemic. Kamusta yung adjustment?
Well, it's already been one full academic year, no? At least nearly one full academic year since the pandemic hit, and there's been a moved and emphasis for online education, online distance learning. The adjustment siguro, it depends eh. On one hand, there are people who are better equipped. They have good internet connection, they have the gadgets, they have the necessary resources. But it's easy to speak on that portion, especially when you yourself don't necessarily go through that. I speak for, well, the experiences that my students also tell me, as well as my colleagues, my friends. It's quite difficult when you don't have a reliable internet connection, when your gadgets are not as reliable as you would like them to be. So, as much as it's already been a year, there's still a lot of growing pains surrounding it. Kumbaga, kailangan tino-tolerate natin at tinitiis natin kasi wala tayong choice kundi magpatuloy. At yun ang isa sa mga pinakamalaking challenge natin ngayon. Paano ba natin ipaparating ng mabuti ang mga pag-aaral, ang mga kaaralan na gusto nating iparating sa mga tao at mga estudyante sa epektibong paraan sa ngayon sa online education. So, a year, I would say for some, we've already been adjusted. But that's the minority, I would say. That's still the minority.
Okay. So, on a personal note, I want to ask you, do you think that since we had this kind of pandemic, the transition is very hard for some who are not tech savvy? How's the quality of education? Kasi you're in the field no?
Uh,
Kamusta? How's your assessment? Is there a big changes or how do you assess it?
well, of course, you asked this is a personal question. So I can only speak from my point of view, my
Yeah.
perspective. It's challenging kasi one of the main resources or one of the things I primarily bank on when I'm teaching is face-to-face interactions. The capacity to
Mhm.
build something that's not exactly a boundary between me and my students. It's a more authentic and sincere connections built on a common need to learn. So I'm learning from them, they're learning from me, hopefully, as I introduce concepts. So making sure that somehow I'm getting my points across despite this online distance learning, trying to make sure that I'm conveying myself with sincerity when I say that they can approach me, they can ask me anything, they can communicate their concerns to me. That's the biggest challenge, I think, especially considering our current circumstances, making sure that these students not only are being introduced to these lessons, but somehow ensuring that they can understand it, they can apply it. That's the biggest challenge. And formulating assessments around that, essays, trying to get their insights, is a key step in that direction.
Understandable. Kasi, of course, as part of the academe and as a teacher, instructor, you have this task talaga na kung before it's challenging, now that we have this kind of abnormal setup, if I may say, na talagang ang hirap mag-adjust kasi I believe, no, even working from home, it's difficult na. How about learning from home?
Yeah.
No, ang daming siguro I don't know, na-experience mo ba na on your students' background may maingay?
Yeah. Uh,
How do you
y-
handle that, by the way?
siguro, the way I handle it kasi, I just do my best to make sure they're comfortable. I don't necessarily require them to turn on their cameras if they feel like their environment or their background is not conducive. Uh, they don't need necessarily to turn on their microphones. They participate in our class via chat if they feel more comfortable with that. And that's completely fine. That's completely fine. It feels
Mm,
monotonous to a degree, no? Kasi you're it's like you're speaking to yourself. It's like you're
yeah.
talking to yourself. But I still try to maintain that sense of genuine connection with the students because again, they're already at home. It's not like they're students 24/7. They have their roles as a child to their parents, a sibling, and they have other responsibilities as well outside of your class, your subject. So, maintaining an air of compassion as well as a degree of understanding for me, is necessary to, at the very least, make them comfortable and receptive to the concepts that I'm trying to introduce.
Okay. So, we're very much about your experience, no, after this pandemic. Pero totoo din naman there's a lot and bigger adjustment from everyone naman, no, in general. But
Yeah,
most kasi na affected talaga by this is, the question is how about the education kasi maraming mga groups of people that they want freeze yung education nga nila freeze nga 'di ba parang they want it
academic
to
freeze. Yeah,
academic freeze yun kasi what's happening right now and palagay ko medyo matatagalan pa yung magkaroon ulit ng face to face and yung back to normal talaga na
Yeah.
like what we had, no? Nung when we were in college na talaga ang daming tao, masaya,
Naka,
nakakakaba kapag may
nakaupo sa
recitation
hallway.
na. Oo, pag break, pupunta sa hallway, pupunta sa mga canteens. I say canteens kasi marami naman tayong mga pwedeng puntahan, no, sa ating school
Magpapaalam
before.
na magsi-CR pag akyat may turon.
Correct. And then, syempre, yun yung, well, hindi naman lahat, pero yun yung nami-miss ng mga tao ngayon. Lalo na
Yeah.
one academic year na, no? And hindi natin kasi makita ngayon kung ano talagang magiging estado next year or sa mga susunod na taon, lalo na wala pang vaccine. Okay. So now, Mr. Xavier, ayan, we have our topic discussion and I want it to
Yeah.
formally open. And this is very interesting kasi talaga namang people may not know kung ano-ano nga ba talaga ang mga three branches of the government. And we want to know more deeply about the understanding of these three branches of the government. And earlier, na-discuss ko na nga siya kanina, pero syempre, ngayon from you, we want to know more about it. Pero bago ang lahat, we will have our short break para at
Okay.
least may excitement. And sa mga students, I am inviting you to comment down below or to PM me. Kasi marami kasi hindi nagko-comment sa live. They are messaging me personally. So later, maganda ka, may mga questions sila na ibibigay sa atin. Okay, so students and to all Filipinos who are watching us worldwide and live, the conversations will be right back.
We'll be back shortly. This is The Conversations, only here on Big Media.
Technology allows us to explore a variety of opportunities. So why not grab one for you? Kickstart your online business with Big Benta. Create an account, visit our store builder, then make your online shop. Be visible, gain customers, and run your business hassle-free. Plus, enjoy the support of our local merchandising team to maximize our platform. Make technology work for you with Big Benta, Pinoy e-commerce site made for you. After this pandemic, let's support the Filipino community. Buy local, visit local, go local.
Now back to The Conversations, only here on Big Media.
All right, so welcome back to the conversations. And now we are going to formally open our topic discussion with our guest expert. And we want to know more about a deeper understanding about these three branches of the government, in particular here in the Philippines, and how it works, and how this co-equal body interact to each other. Okay, so again, let's welcome our guest, Mr. Xavier.
Good to be back. Hi, Chester.
Hello. Okay, so andito na tayo. Now, let's start it with discussing or knowing more about the executive branch. Okay.
Wait. Let's try to frame the discussion then as well. No?
Okay.
Siguro, a good way to try and start this out is to establish why there are three branches of government in the first place and why it's a fundamental aspect of most democratic governments. What we can say, no, is that since the government is that administrative arm of the state, in this case, in this particular context rather, it's the administrative body tasked with handling the society of the Philippines. Okay, And in this sense, it follows then that this administrative body has a lot of powers and responsibilities necessary for the conduct of our society. Now, that kind of power in a singular body is risky already. Okay,
Mhm.
there's this common notion, no? Having too much power leads to corruption, or having too much power will lead to abuse, and that's why it became necessary then to try and divide these powers into three co-equal branches of government, what we come to know as the executive, the legislative, as well as the judiciary. Now, these three are co-equal and independent of one another. Co-equal in the sense that there's no single body or there's no branch of government above the others. Okay. And now we need to infringe our understanding on that particular notion, because it seems for our context, no, there's this misconception almost that the president is in charge. The president is above the legislative as well as the judiciary. It seems that's the most simplistic notion. And now we can lead into the discussion of the executive. What is the executive branch of government? Well, in many scholarly works, no, they would say that the executive is tasked or given the power of the sword. What do we mean by this? Bakit espada? Because compared to the legislative or the judiciary, ang ehekutibo, the executive, has the responsibility to execute and administer the laws of the land. They're the ones who act and deliver provisions, services, and use these laws and provisions to maintain order within the land as well as to run society. And who falls under the executive branch of government? Of course, we have the president, the vice president, and then the departments and agencies that follow within that particular branch of government. Okay?
Mhm.
So, ito ang main notion natin. The executive then is that main acting body that interacts primarily with the people because of the laws established. And so, it's the primary arm that exercises powers like police power because it ensures the security of the state as well as enforces these laws for the benefit of the society at large. All right? So that's the executive branch. It carries out the law. Thank you for the visual aid. Okay. So
Mhm.
it carries out the law. And thusly, it's the highest power, or rather, it's the highest elected office. Okay. In the executive branch, let's emphasize that. In the executive branch,
Okay.
he's the chief executive officer in this regard. But again, three separate, co equal, and independent branches of government. That just because the president has the most power in the executive branch does not at all imply that the president has power over either the judicial or the legislative.
Mhm.
Okay? So yun yung main point natin dito. The president, while having a lot of power vested in their person, is not superior over the other branches of government, despite appearances to the contrary. All right?
Okay.
Okay. So, uh, do I just keep going ba?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
So
okay.
yeah,
So for the executive, you're done
not,
discussion.
there's going to be intersectionalities here
Okay.
and
Okay.
there. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So best example of this, no, is when the executive carries out these laws, and when these executives, well, the most clear examples of this, when people are taken in by the police for
Mhm.
said violations, because again, they're the primary arm that exercises police power in carrying out a law and making sure that laws are followed and ensuring good and easy transactions for the people to actually benefit off of the services offered by the government through their agencies. Okay. So they're the ones we interact with at large and the
Mhm.
most when we actually need something from the government, such as in their departments. When we try to renew our licenses, we have to go to the LTO, right? Or we need to go to, when it's a business permit, we need to renew through municipalities, through municipal offices. But largely, these permits are under the purview of the DTI. Okay? So all of
Mhm.
these fall under the executive. Those are the responsibilities of the executive to carry out the law, provide services, as well as help us build the good transactions, as well as to give us our needs and our privileges as citizens of this republic. Okay. So, yun ang pinaka masasabi natin sa executive. It's supposed to be the most servicing arm of the state, in other words. It's the most accessible, it's the most direct in terms of our interactions with the state, in terms
Okay.
of visibility as well. Yeah. So that's the executive.
Okay. I'll park first my question kasi may
Uh-uh.
nag-PM na sa akin pero mamaya na muna yan. Sige. Now, after discussing the gusto kasi maintindihan muna nila. Okay. Now, let's go sa legislative. Ayan.
Okay. So the legislative, in contrast to the executive, no, is burdened with the power of the purse. So it's responsible
Mhm.
for two main it has two main responsibilities rather. First, the power to formulate the budget, to create budgets, to budget our funding, as well as to figure out where to source these funds. Second, it's also the main lawmaking body. And dito natin pinakakilala ang Kongreso natin. The
Mhm.
formulation of laws, the formulation of things we base off of the Constitution in order to address needs as well as the most pressing concerns in our society. Okay? So that's why we have instances or, well, biggest instances that are siguro, we could say, heavily invested ang mga tao sa mga proceedings, especially these days. One of the things
Mhm.
that is a prominent bill that is currently being read in the Congress, SOGI bill, of course. So the SOGI bill, having been proposed by one of the houses, goes through
Mhm.
readings, and through these readings, first reading, they read the title of the bill. Second reading, they discuss the provisions, the exact specifics, the contents of the bill. And if they pass the second reading, third reading, up to a vote na. Then if it passes the
Mhm.
third reading, transmitted to the other house of Congress. Okay. But see, our Congress is bicameral in nature. It has two houses, upper or lower house, what we know as the Senate as well as the House of Representatives, respectively. Bakit nga ba dalawa ang chambers ng Kongreso natin?
Mhm.
First, no, the primary differentiation here is in terms of size as well as in terms of concern. In terms of size, the Senate, has 24 members. 24 members, and one of them is the Senate President. In contrast, the House of Representatives is composed of around 250 members at any given time. And in that particular respect, may distinction pa pagdating sa membership nila. Because when we're talking about the Senate, they're all the same, other than the Senate President, whom their fellow senators would seek to choose from their ranks. The
Mhm.
House of Representatives, on the other hand, is composed of two different kinds of representatives. We have district representatives who, well, as their name implies, represent the districts, the localities from which they hail from. So it
Mhm.
necessarily means these representatives are representing their areas, their localities. Okay. So they need a more, I suppose, direct and visible approach with their particular areas in order to better represent their interests and needs in the lower house.
Okay.
On the other hand, we also have party list representatives who are different from district representatives in that they're not confined to a particular area. Rather, they are tasked, with the responsibility to represent party lists. Party lists being these sectors who are often underrepresented, marginalized. So we have prominent party lists such as ACT, such as Kabataan Party List, among others, who are represented by their chosen representatives in the House in order to articulate the interests of these individuals, this sector rather, that
Mhm.
is often left at the sidelines. Hindi nabibigyan ng, they're not given due attention. Okay? Because again, they're on the sidelines. Nasa laylayan sila. There
Mhm.
might be too few of them, or their concerns might be considered not as important, I suppose, not a bigger priority compared to others or compared to more visible district concerns. Okay. Now, Bakit dalawa ang chamber natin ng Kongreso? We have a bicameral Congress because, of course, the composition is an implied answer there already. The House, being composed of district representatives as well as party list representatives, is looking more inward. All right, it looks more inward within Philippine
Mhm.
society, being concerned with their localities, their own districts, no, and trying to forward certain needs and provisions that would benefit other districts as well, means that they're looking more within our borders. Mas inward ang pagtingin nila. On the other hand, when you're talking about the Senate, which has the most responsibility in terms of coming to terms with an agreement with other countries, it looks more outward. The Senate's bills and concerns are usually more national in nature, more national, more international, and global in nature compared to the House of Representatives. So we have one eye looking outward and another eye looking inward, meant to ideally represent the interests of the Philippines as a whole. In the House, they represent the interests of their constituents within their localities, whereas
Mhm.
in the Senate, they represent us as Filipinos for the rest of the world as well as the entire country. Okay. So that's the House, or that's our Congress, rather. That's our Congress.
Okay. So, wow, I mean, ako personally talaga napapatahimik ako kasi talagang it reflects talaga, nagre-refresh. Okay, thank you so much, Xavier. Now, let's go sa judicial branch.
Okay.
What is
So
judicial branch?
earlier, no, we used the analogy, or rather the phrase, that the executive has the power of the sword, the legislative the power of the purse. Now the judiciary has can be what can be said as the power of the book or the power of the law. Okay.
Okay.
In terms of responsibility, the judiciary, the judicial branch of government, is that guardian of the Constitution. It's that guardian of the Constitution. It's not meant to enforce it, rather, it's meant to interpret all actions of other branches of government, legislative, executive, in favor of the Constitution. So, in terms of responsibility, then, it evaluates the law, it interprets the law. It resolves conflicts from individuals or bodies. It could be corporations, groups, doesn't matter, as long as they're a legally recognized entity. The judicial branch can take their cases or their disputes and interpret it against the spirit of our Constitution in order to verify whether or not there's been a violation or whether or not there's an actual case to be resolved. All right. So here, the judicial branch of government has the responsibility then to be the arbiter of the Constitution, to be the representative of the Constitution. If the legislative is a representative for the common people, the citizens of our country, the executive is the most visible member of the state. No, the executive seems to represent the government more than the people in terms of carrying out its function and interacting with the people. The judiciary is more the arbiter, the representative of our constitution. And in this sense, no, it has the biggest responsibility then.
Mhm.
Because necessarily speaking, by being the representative of the constitution, it must follow that it interprets all events or issues brought to its plate and attention through petitions as well as cases filed to resolve these cases in the favor of the Constitution and whom the Constitution will privilege or protect.
Mhm.
Okay? So, yun yung main responsibility niya. That's why, that's why during instances of major controversy, especially within acts of government, no, such as last year's anti-terror bill, or should I say anti-terror law now, even up until now, petitions have, even up until now, or there have been a multitude of petitions filed against the anti-terror law, seeking to bring into question its constitutionality and render it null and void because one specific provision, Section 4, if I recall correctly, of the anti terror law, runs contrary to certain provisions with regard to the Bill of Rights. Okay. And the Bill of Rights is something enshrined in the Constitution. This meaning that no law passed by Congress and approved by the President may go against it. May go against it.
Excuse me.
You okay?
Yeah,
All right.
malamig sa
So,
studio.
okay. So, no law may go against or run contrary to the spirit and letter of our Constitution. So that's why a lot of people, myself included, are hopeful that petitions against the anti terror law will actually favor the Constitution in terms of the results of these petitions. Okay? Because again, particular sections of the anti terror law seem to heavily infringe on fundamental human rights enshrined in the Constitution. Okay? So that's the judicial branch of government. Yeah.
Okay, so later as we return, kanina may mga nagtatanong na rin. Sasagutin natin isa-isa bawat department kasi they have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So magbabalik po ang the conversations.
Natatakot na ako sa mga tanong.
We'll be back shortly. This is The Conversations. Only here on Big Media.
An online program that takes you to all corners of beauty and lifestyle. This is Beauty in a Box, providing insights on how beauty and lifestyle of all kinds will be of help to everyone, may it be in their professional or personal lives, by improving one's confidence. Beauty in a Box, every Saturday, 1 p.m. Philippine time, hosted by certified makeup artist and beauty enthusiast, Aaliyah Ambre. Beauty in a Box, only here on V81 Radio, Manila. The program for the millennials that will showcase young professionals' worth, aspirations, and successes in doing what they believe is right, progressive, and inclusive. Making a difference. Making a difference. Join them as they discover the path to self and societal fulfillment while making a difference. Hosted by empowered and cool millennial Erica Mizon. Together with her cool millennials, they will be making a difference. Every Saturday, 3 p.m. Philippine time. Only here on V81 Radio, Manila.
It's time to feed your mind. It's time to know the real answer. It's time to be aware. Information that you need to know, straight from the experts. Timely, reliable, and relevant. Different sides of issues and from different walks of life. All of them with questions that demand answers. Here in the Conversations with Chester Quidlat, every Sunday at 10 a.m. Only here in Big Media. For harnessing luck and success in doing business, this is Philippine Business Feng Shui at your service. Sa ikaunlad ng bayan, Feng Shui ang kailangan. Hosted by your partner in luck, Master Aldrich Dalumpines. Every Wednesdays at 8 p.m. See you on our next learning modules for luck in business. Only here on Big Media. Now back to the Conversations. Only here on Big Media.
Welcome back to the program, and of course earlier we discussed about the three branches of the government, and now we are going to ask questions and to deep dive more about some scenarios para mas maintindihan natin kung ano-ano nga ba talaga ang ginagawa, no, at maaaring gawin ng bawat departamentong ito. Okay? So let's go back with our guest.
Okay.
All right. So, Xavier, let's go first, no, dun sa executive branch. Ayan.
Ah,
So, ipa-flash lang si executive branch dyan. Kasi may mga katanungan
okay.
kami sa'yo. Kasi you mentioned earlier. By the way, no, I like the discussion earlier kasi it's very um detailed, no. Now, you mentioned the executive, very symbolic, no? He holds the sword. And the first question here is, eto, unknown na to, hindi ko na i-mention. So first question is, how about the vice president? What
Okay.
is his role?
Okay. The vice president's key role, though, is always to act as a support within the executive. First and foremost, the assumption herein is the moment the president proves incapable of carrying out their duties or incapacitated it to whatever degree, the vice president must step in order to act and take the role of chief executive. All right. But in a normal operating capacity, the vice president is usually delegated to a certain agency by the choice of the president in order for them to have a direct hand in leadership as well as still fulfill their role as a member of the executive branch of government. Okay. Best example of this was, of course, Marojas back then, right? He was given a capacity, or wait, I'm sorry. He was given, or I'm sorry. It's all jumbled up. Okay, go. Let me try to backtrack on that. Good example of this would be vice presidents who were given roles to handle the DILG, to handle certain departments. These are the most direct manifestations of their secondary nature to support the operation of the executive branch of government. All
Mhm.
right. So we had, of course, vice president, or I don't remember the specifics anymore. I'm very muddy with my history. I'm
Mhm.
very muddy with my history. But of course, these were common cases. For example, of course, GMA during her time as Vice President of Joseph Estrada was
Mhm.
given a role within the cabinet. All
Mhm.
right, a very prominent role within the cabinet. The same goes as well for Vice President Jejo Marbinay under
Yeah.
Noynoy. Okay,
Yes.
so this is a common way not only to ensure that there's an additional capacity for the vice president to act and exercise their power, but
Mhm.
also to again maintain efficiency within the operations of the executive branch. Okay,
Hmm.
so hindi lang substitute player lagi ang vice president.
Okay. Kasi kung titingnan natin ang konstekto ng executive, no, and people, no, alam din naman natin, by the way, speaking of vice president, belated happy birthday to VP Lenny, kahapon
Yes.
kaarawan niya. Ayun. So the vice president itself, no, or her or himself, uh his administrative work is to support the president, correct?
Not necessarily the president, but rather to support in the operations of the executive branch. And
Mhm.
if given a task to head a department or agency, act on behalf of the president as their alter ego. Kumbaga, they're the direct representative of leadership in order to manage the particular department or agency.
Okay. Kasi, this is an old saying, no? Na parang the vice president's role is just to wait, no? Negative happens to the president para siya na yung umupo. I have this
Right.
scenario. I don't know what you can say about this. Kasi during the time of President Erap, no? When he was
Uh,
kicked out from Malacanang, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo act as a president. Correct?
yeah.
Automatic. There are some that says na it's unconstitutional.
Well, that's a I suppose a legal gray area we can say, considering the functions of the provisions in the Constitution, because
Mhm.
technically, Erap wasn't impeached, nor
Mhm.
did he resign.
Yes, yes.
So, to I suppose you can say it was incapacity or inavailability, no, to perform his duties at the time when he did leave. But in terms of legal technicalities, you could argue that it was in fact unconstitutional because again, there was no
Mhm.
resignation, there was no impeachment.
Mhm.
He didn't formally step down. So that's a bit of controversy there, but not
Yes.
I'm not a legal expert,
Yeah.
so I can't really.
Okay. So thank you. So now let's go to the other branch of the government.
Uh-huh.
Ayan. Let's go to the legislative. Ayan. So in this department or branch of the government, okay, I have the question here na
Uh-uh.
what if daw mag-overlap yung power ni legislative kay sa dalawang branches? Is that possible?
Uh-uh.
And if not, why? Ayan.
Well, see, while we have the principle of checks and balances as well as separation of powers, no, there's still a degree of minimum interference or interventions between these branches of government. Take, for example, the executive's pseudo legislative powers. The executive can perform that can create executive orders, presidential decrees, which in essence function as laws of the land, right?
Mhm.
And they can also veto certain bills passed by Congress, transmitted by Congress to the office of the president. They can veto that and reject a proposed law altogether. But see, this overlap is also a healthy exercise when
Mhm.
practiced in ideal amounts and based on the principles of checks and balances again. All right. So when we're talking about this intersectionality or overlap between the legislative as well as the or as well as the executive, rather the executive, then we're talking about the responsibilities within the Constitution. Okay, so
Mhm.
for example, when the legislative, when the Congress tries to transmit a proposed bill proposed to become a law to the president may act on it. They have three options. The president may sign it into law, the president may veto the proposed law, or let it lapse into a law without signing it for a period of 30 days. Okay, but on the other hand, the legislative can then slightly infringe on the executive's capacities because
Mhm.
they screen the appointees of the president for members of the cabinet. All right. So, to that degree, overlap is necessary. Overlap is necessary as well as normal in the functions of the branches of government. The problem therein is if there's an overstep in terms of discretion. Okay. What we call a grave abuse of discretion, or in terms of more than more yeah, a grave abuse of discretion in their exercise of their responsibilities. So while indeed no, we have the president's capacity, for example, to declare a bill as urgent, to fast track
Mhm.
its discussions in the legislative, they can also inadvertently negate the idea of a bill in the first place by saying, oh, I might never sign this particular provision, or I will never support this particular controversy or this side. So there's still a lot of influence that's not necessarily written within the laws among these branches of government. So
Mhm.
to say that overlap is wrong in essence, not exactly. In moderation and in ideal practices, overlap is good. Overlap is necessary because, again, these branches can then check on one another, prevent abuses of power, and ensure that they are performing their duties. Kumbaga, watchmen sila. They watch over the conduct of one another's responsibilities to ensure that they're doing the right thing. Yeah.
Okay. Now for you mentioned earlier no, that we are on a setup of what we call bicameral, wherein
Yeah.
we have two kinds of Congress, no? The upper house and the lower, the houses, the upper and the lower houses. You mentioned earlier that there are party list. So can a group of people
Mhm.
be a party list to represent a certain, or there is a parameter or qualification? Can anyone ba join and make their own party list?
Well, as long I'm not sure the exact number of people
Mhm.
required, but yes, people can declare themselves a party list as long as again they belong to a marginalized sector. For
Mhm.
example, the Kabataan Party List, of course, they belong to the
Mhm.
youth sector. Ano na ba yung
Hmm.
qualifications to be considered a youth in the Philippines? Pasok pa ba ako doon?
Hindi na.
uh, ewan
Joke.
ko. Pero yun yung isa sa mga importante na bagay dito. When you're trying to form a party list, it's supposed to be hinged on the idea that you're representing a marginalized sector. that's not a part
Mhm.
of the majority, whose needs and fundamental, fundamental needs, fundamental
Mhm.
controversies are not typically addressed and given due attention. Okay?
Mhm.
So, yes, in fact, most people can form a party list as long as they can say that they are indeed a marginalized or underrepresented sector. Okay? So, we have, for example, Gabriela, of course,
Yeah.
marginalized. We are a very patriarchal society. Okay. But for newer party lists, I suppose, who want to form a party list, I cannot say the legal technicalities or what technicalities are involved in forming a party list.
Okay. Now you mentioned also earlier the veto, no? So
Yeah.
when the president vetoed a bill,
Mhm.
automatically it's void na, or this can be
Okay.
still be a law.
Okay. So when the president vetoes a bill passed by Congress, no, it can
Mhm.
still become a law, but it
Mhm.
necessitates what we call a legislative override.
Mhm.
Here, the Congress votes two-thirds that they in fact believe that the law is a necessary measure, and so regardless of how the president of whether the president agrees with the bill or not, it will become a law as long as the vote is two-thirds of all members of each house. So the Senate must vote that it's a necessary law, two-thirds of the Senate, 24,
Mhm.
two-thirds, that's 16. Okay. And the House, I'm not gonna do math. I'm sorry. I don't want to humiliate myself here. But
Yeah.
two-thirds of the number of
Yes.
the House of Representatives. So veto can be overridden by the legislative branch of government. Okay. So
Okay.
just because it was denied can still be a law.
All right. So I would like to take this opportunity then kasi there are some misleading information when it
Uh-huh.
comes on passing a bill.
Uh-uh.
Lalo na parang there's an argument before about Soji na naipasa na siya sa isang reading but there
Uh-uh.
are people saying na it's alo na. So, Xavier, dalhin mo nga kami doon sa
Uh-uh.
proseso para malaman ng
Okay.
mga nanonood sa atin.
Okay. So whenever a bill is proposed, no, it may originate from either the Senate, it may originate from either the House of Representatives. Okay.
Okay.
So both the Senate and the House can create bills. It can be a Senate bill or a House bill. So,
Mhm.
regardless of where it comes from, a bill goes through three different readings per House. Per
Per
House.
house.
Yes.
Okay.
So that amounts to six total readings. All right. So, for example, a bill originates within the House of Representatives. Okay,
Mhm.
they can propose, for example, that pineapples do not belong on pizzas, and thusly all pizza chains cannot sell pineapple pizzas anymore. Okay, so first reading of the bill is just the title. It's just a recognition that the bill exists. Second reading of the bill, however, then they shall now read the full contents of the bill. Full contents, full provisions, implementing rules and regulations, even. So, by reading the full contents of the bill now, comes the debate. Second reading yon.
Hmm.
Once they do finish with the second reading and propose changes to the contents of the bill, that there ends that. Third reading will now include a final vote to approve the bill, including the revisions proposed in the second reading. All right. So, back to our earlier example, pineapples on pizzas now illegal. Ayaw na ng kongreso natin, pineapples on pizzas. Okay, so the House will then, after the third reading, including the revisions, will now transmit the House bill to the Senate in order to go through three readings once again.
Mhm.
Okay, so once it goes through these three readings, assuming there are no revisions, they can now pass it and transmit the proposed bill with the signature of the leader of the House as well as the Senate President to the office of the President for either their approval, their veto, or their lapse. Papabayaan na lang.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So, matagal 'no? Matagal ang proseso.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hindi
It's by
siya
no means a short process.
okay. Kasi when you mentioned that that they need rather to pass it on three different readings in two different houses, that will
Yes.
take time, right? So and
Yes.
after that they needed to pass to the president himself and then sign it, and that's the time that this bill is now a law.
Yes. At
Okay.
least, yeah.
All right. So to all of our viewers now, there's the deep understanding about a bill and a law. Okay, pag hindi pa to nasa-signed and hindi pa to tapos sa six readings as a whole, it's not a law. Okay, thank you so much. Now, let's move on to the third branch of the government, okay, which is
Yes.
the judiciary.
Judiciary.
Okay. Now, for this is the funny part, no?
Uh-uh.
People majority, when I'm asking, some students before and youths, they are not recognizing this part of judicial kasi tahimik nga naman unless lang na nagkaroon ng
Mm,
issue when we have our the impeachment of the former chief justice na
uh-uh.
mahalaga yung kanyang papel kasi parang ang mindset lang ng iba parang it's more of law. Akala nga nila kasi since they are the lawyers, justices and chief justice, they are the one who makes the law.
No,
It's
no, no,
not.
no.
It's the
Yeah.
legislative. Now,
Yes.
speaking of making a law, once it is signed by the president na ano yung role ng judicial sa batas na naipasa at napirmahan?
Well, in terms of ano, no, immediate roles, the judiciary has no immediate actions there. Of course,
Mm.
the justices or judges may of course hold their own views as well as comment on these decisions, but until such a time where individuals concerned or immediately affected by the law actually forward or file petitions regarding controversies surrounding the past law, that's the only time they can act and determine whether or not something is constitutional or unconstitutional through what we call a judicial review. Now,
Mm.
in terms of initiative, no, in terms of, well, yun nga, initiative as well as a capacity to freely act, that's where the judicial may seem ill-equipped. Baka doon natin masabi na hindi siya ganun kakapangyarihan, especially given the responsibility nga that it's the final guardian of the Constitution. But that's precisely the point as well. All right? So, by limiting as well the judiciary's capacity to act until such a time wherein we can file or citizens file petitions against a particular law, then we're ensuring to a degree that it's a necessary petition in the first place. That there's an existed controversy surrounding what is passed in order for the judiciary to rightfully act and determine its constitutionality. Kumbaga, as powerful as the judiciary is, and as much as it actually has the responsibility to safeguard the Constitution as well as the citizens from possible oversteps and abuses of either the legislative or the executive, it needs to be kickstarted. It needs people to act and express their dissent as well as their interest to question these particular acts of government. All right. So, yes, it's powerful, but it also necessitates the actions of the people as well as the concern of the people.
Okay. Now, we want to understand about more of this judicial and its people, no? So we have justices and their
Yes.
roles will be, and we have the chief justice. Can you introduce it to this people inside judicial branch?
Okay. So, ano no, by very essence, the Supreme Court, well, particularly the Supreme Court as the highest office with respect to the judicial branch of government, is comprised rather of 15 justices and one chief justices, the rest the 14 associate justices. Okay. So under them, we also have the Court of Appeals, the Sandigan Bayan, as well as the Court of Tax Appeals. And even further down the rungs of the judicial ladder, we then have the regional trial courts, as well as the Sharia
Mhm.
district courts. And then at the lowest level, we have municipal trial courts, metropolitan trial courts, and ayun nga. So it manifests itself even at the most common ground level already. It's something that's supposedly accessible for us for when we do encounter grievances or oversteps from the government, or even if we have grievances towards our fellow citizens. Because again, purview ng judiciary settle controversies among different entities which also include the government, in favor of the Constitution, as well as to settle sino ba ang namalian, sino ang
Mhm.
dapat pagbayarin. Yan.
Okay. Um, Meron lang kasi akong mga tanong dito. So, they want
Uh-huh.
us to discuss then later yung this is on the ano na to, kumbaga parang concluding part na. May
Uh-huh.
papakita lang kami mga logo, umpisahan natin sa Malacanang. And since
Okay.
we understand about the three branches, we
Mhm.
deep dive about their works and the questions earlier. Now, this is very personal and we want to know your own opinion. This is your opinion,
Okay.
no? It doesn't reflect to the show, the management, and the host. Okay. Hindi, kasi gusto nating himayin. Ang dami
Mhm.
kasi laging controversial dito sa mga branches na to. And
Understand.
gusto ko malaman, on your point of view, ano yung masasabi mo dito? Okay.
Okay.
Now, let's start with with Malacanang. Okay. So,
Okay.
yan, may flash dyan na photo na Malacanang Palace. Okay.
Okay.
Habang inaantay natin, the question goes like this.
Mm.
Now, we have the three co-equal branches of the government, and then we have Malacanang, the executive.
Mhm.
There are controversies, no? May babanggitin ako mga controversies dito. And
Okay.
just tell us, what is your point of view? Kung naging tama ba? Or may mali? Okay.
Okay. G.
Very interesting to. Let's start with the martial law. Because we are
Okay.
talking about executive, we all know that declaring martial law is part of the president's power. And what is your point of view about the
Well,
declaration of martial law?
ang sa akin kasi, martial law based on necessity. Sure. Sige, if it's really in the interest of the people and there's an actual security threat, okay, martial law is supposed to protect us. It's supposed to protect us. But in the context of history, as well as its use in order to prolong former president and then eventual dictator Marcos's tenure in power, as well as grip on power, dun na natin dapat questionin. Okay, martial law is not necessary, so to speak, unless, again, there is an actual security threat that may endanger the lives of people as well as the entirety of the Philippines. So, if there is a proven threat, sure, why not? But in terms of just declaring martial law under an invisible threat, under an imagined threat, in order to quote unquote demand obedience from the people to discipline society, I wouldn't agree. I would never agree with that.
Okay. Second question. Ito
Mhm.
very timely to. Since we are
Uh-uh.
talking about the executive, your stand about the government actions ngayon, especially the executive part, facing the COVID-19.
Oh man. Okay. um, well, considering the recent, well, flurry of one of my favorite professors calls the hapag ng bayan,
Mhm.
it's a major manifestation already that the executive in particular, has not been addressing this pandemic well. Yun yung long and short of that. These community pantries are a manifestation of a need to survive with or without government aid. We've already been experiencing this pandemic for for more than a year. Okay, the first quarantines were declared in March of 2020, and
Yes.
it's already April 2021, and we were ping ponging back and forth between an ECQ and MECQ. Even up until now, there's still a lot of confusion because within their own offices, they can't seem to agree on certain stances with regard to handling the community pantries, with regard to communicating among these offices. It's it's largely a show that it's been failing for a long while now. It's been failing for a long while now. And now there's a lot of interference from the government with regard to community pantries, trying to paint it
Yes.
in the negative light. So, to me at least, it seems like a desperate attempt to try and color their PR or this PR disaster, which has been going on for an entire year. Because remember, how much was loaned from several sources in order to procure vaccines? And now, vaccine rollout is inefficient. Now they're saying that there's not enough vaccines, that we don't have money to provide aid, to provide support to our citizens. Saan ang pera? Where's the accountability there? And now that people are actually trying to help one another at the ground level, it becomes then an affront on, it seems to be an affront to the government's efficiency because now they're trying to antagonize these pantries. They're trying to say that these are, well, breeding ground for communist ideals, which they are not. Okay? So in terms of overall pandemic response, considering our current state and how some of our neighbors within Southeast Asia are already on roads to recovery, especially compared to us, I wouldn't hesitate to call the government response so far as a failure. I wouldn't
Okay.
hesitate.
Wow. Very deep and informative. It's very enlightened in such a way because yes, I agree what happening right now. No, I get the point about what's currently happening in our administration and how they act on this pandemic. And it's not a joke. It's been a year now, and you mentioned it's ping pong thing that go here and on and off. Okay, thank you. And now let's move on
Mhm.
to the legislative branch. Both
Okay.
house and both houses, upper and the lower house. This is very controversial in terms
Mhm.
of before, no? The pork barrel. What can you say about the
Okay.
pork? Kasi sila yung
Right, right,
nasa ano dyan eh, limeline.
right. So pork barrel, no? It's one of those instances earlier we were discussing how overlap may be for the benefit or for the detriment, right? So it's
Mhm.
one of those instances where the overlap between the executive as well as the legislative is problematic. Okay, since again, it's the executive who is handing out pork, incentives, priority development assistance funds, whatever you can call it, in order to, well, maybe illicitly or implied to gather the favor of the legislators. Okay, so pork is a manifestation of that because it's no longer in the conduct of their duties. It's very political in nature. Okay? Kung kaalyado ka, mas garantisado mabibigyan ka ng pork. Kapag hindi, wala kang makukuha. Which seems to facilitate the kind of disloyalty among parties in our country. Okay?
Mhm.
On top of that, it also is a breeding ground for corruption because when pork is handed out and they're budgeted, okay, there are no itemized breakdowns of where these funds actually go. Okay, so there's no transparency there as well. So in terms of pork, it's been largely misused and often proven to have
Mhm.
been misused as a way to politicize proceedings within the government. So if as much as possible it still hasn't been, hypothetically speaking, I would very
Mhm.
much disagree with the continued use of pork barrel systems.
They called it also discretionary fund, no?
Yeah, yeah.
So meaning that this Congress, each of them, ano, are
Yes.
giving this discretionary fund or pork barrel and they are using it discretionary kung anong gusto nila.
Yes, yes.
And we're talking about millions here, no? It's not just thousands of pesos. So the abolition of pork barrel, you're in or out?
Definitely. Definitely in.
Okay.
It's a weapon, it's a political weapon. It's a political weapon to ensure favors within the government as well as party loyalty.
Okay, understandable. Okay, now let's move on. We have the last one, the judicial branch.
The
So
judicial.
the issue
Mhm.
about the impeachment of Chief Justice Renato Corona before, what can you say about that?
Well, on one hand, no, the paano ba? Kasi we have these guarantees surrounding chief justices or justices for that matter when it comes to the judicial branch of government. But the
Mhm.
thing is, it followed at the very least legal proceedings. He went through the proper processes of impeachment. All right. So there was an actual hearing, there was a lot of litigation involved in order to figure out whether or not Renato Corona did indeed perform or rather exercise discretion or grave abuse of discretion rather in the performance of his duties. Okay. So in terms of actual impeachment procedures, they followed the letter of the law there. They followed that.
Mhm.
In terms of the political motivations there, I cannot particularly speak for that because at the time, no, I would say that I wasn't particularly invested in learning about that. And even up until now, I still really can't figure a more tangible opinion with regard to that particular instance, considering what followed and what surrounded the entire impeachment of former Chief Justice Corona.
Okay. Okay. So it's been an hour of discussion and ayun, nasagot na natin. I just want to highly recommend this episode, especially with different universities who also supporting this show. Kasi it's a very deep understanding. Eh. There's three kinds of scenario wherein chinap-chap natin yung bawat branches from their meaning, how it works, the issues and controversials about this. So, okay, Mr. Xavier, thank you so much for giving us your time
Of
and
course. No?
your knowledge about our topic this afternoon. On behalf of the Conversations team and to our network, Big Media, thank you so much. And I hope that in the near future, we can also invite you again and to be our guest. Do you have someone to mention?
Uh,
Batiin?
Shout out to my family, my grandmother Corazon, my mother Sharon, and my little sister Lorraine. My friends and yeah, my friends both outside of work, my co-faculty, my students. If you guys actually took the time to watch this, and my professors, both old and new. Thank you always for the support as well as the guidance. I wouldn't be able to form these kinds of insights or opinions without you. Siguro, may I say a few parting words?
Yes, yes.
Ano, uh, siguro I would hardly consider myself an expert as of yet. Uh,
Mhm,
it's very much something that I think still would take a lot of time, considering that one, I'm still learning, and technically
mhm.
we're all really still learning, no.
Yes.
So I would much prefer to be called a scholar than an expert.
Mhm.
And of course, there's still something new to learn. I will always still be learning and willing to learn these kinds of concepts. And I would highly encourage the same for everyone, whether or not you're working, whether you're a student, to always be hungry to learn, to never hesitate, rather, to ask questions and to always be open to learning. Because learning whatever field you're interested in, learning whatever hobby you're into, or whatever concern in society we have, it's a necessary part to your development as an individual and your capacity as well to contribute to society. So,
Thank you so much for that moving words and very insightful message, Mr. Xavier Dwight. Thank you so much and gusto ko lang ding batiin yung mga na-required na manood to watch this episode from Adamson University, Far Eastern University, ang suking-suki namin yan dito. And of course, uh, San Beda College Alabang. Ayan. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and to our special scholar guest who give his knowledge and understanding about our topic. Okay, so once again, this is Chester Kidlat, your anchor here in the conversations. Thank you, everyone, and God bless.
likewise, Chester.
It's time to feed your mind. It's time to know the real answer. It's time to be aware. Information that you need to know, straight from the experts. Timely, reliable, and relevant. Different sides of issues and from different walks of life. All of them with questions that demand answers. Here in the Conversations with Chester Quidlat, every Sunday at 10 a.m. Only here in Big Media.